The wind screaming across the Siberian taiga in late November is not just a sound, it is a physical force, a relentless pressure that seeks to bury anything with a heartbeat. For Dr. Evelyn Croft, a 71-year-old retired British ornithologist, the isolation of the Sian Mountains was a chosen exile. After the death of her husband, Thomas Sterling, and a bitter, years-long estrangement from her daughter, Abigail, Evelyn had retreated to this unforgiving wilderness. She spent her days cataloging migratory patterns, finding more comfort in the predictable flight of birds than in the unpredictable nature of human relationships. Her closest human contact was Daniel Pendleton, an aging bush pilot from a neighboring district who dropped off her supplies once a month. Other than the sputtering hum of Daniel's Cessna, Evelyn's world was defined by silence and snow. That was until the morning she found the blood on the ice. It was a Tuesday. The sky the color of bruised iron, when Evelyn was trekking back from checking her camera traps near a frozen riverbed. The trail of red was stark against the fresh powder. Following it into a dense thicket of silver birch, Evelyn found a juvenile golden eagle. It was a massive, magnificent creature, its dark brown feathers violently ruffled, but it was grounded. The bird's left talon was clamped tightly within the rusted, jagged teeth of an illegal steel jaw trap, left behind by poachers years ago and recently exposed by a shifting snowbank. The eagle thrashed as Evelyn approached, its golden eyes wide with wild, predatory terror. It snapped its razor-sharp beak, a warning that it would fight to the death despite its exhaustion. Evelyn knew the unwritten laws of the taiga. The weak perish, and interference only prolongs the inevitable. But looking at the fierce, unbroken spirit in the bird's eyes, a deeply buried maternal instinct flared to life. She could not leave him to freeze. Using her heavy wool coat as a makeshift net, Evelyn threw herself over the panicked bird. It was a chaotic, dangerous struggle. The eagle's free talons tore through her thick canvas trousers, leaving deep, bleeding gashes in her thigh. But Evelyn held on. With agonizing effort, her arthritic hands pried the rusted jaws of the trap apart just enough to slip the mangled leg free. Carrying a 12-pound, terrified apex predator a mile back to her cabin was the hardest physical trial of Evelyn's life. By the time she kicked her front door open and collapsed onto the hardwood floor, she was half delirious from pain and cold. She named him Boreas, after the Greek god of the north wind. The winter of 2021 became a grueling test of endurance for both woman and bird. Evelyn converted her small, cluttered mudroom into a makeshift aviary. The eagle's leg was badly fractured, the flesh torn to the bone. Evelyn, utilizing the meager medical supplies Daniel had flown in months prior, meticulously cleaned the wound, applied splints, and injected the bird with her own emergency stash of broad-spectrum antibiotics. For the first 2 weeks, Boreas refused to eat. He sat in the corner, a huddled mass of defiance. Evelyn sat with him for hours, reading her old journals aloud just so he would grow accustomed to the cadence of her voice. She fed him strips of venison from her own winter rations, using long wooden tongs, until one evening, the eagle finally snatched the meat. A tentative, fragile trust was born. As the months dragged on, the Siberian winter raged outside, but inside, a strange companionship blossomed. When Evelyn worked at her desk, Boreas would hop awkwardly out of the mudroom, perching on the back of a sturdy oak chair, watching her with unblinking, intelligent eyes. He learned the sound of her footsteps. Evelyn, in turn, found herself talking to him about Thomas, about her regrets, and about her daughter, Abigail, whose final words, "You always loved your work more than you loved us," still haunted her. By May, the snows finally began to thaw, revealing the damp, black earth of the taiga. Boreas's leg had healed. A heavy, localized limp remained, but his wings were strong. Evelyn knew she was delaying the inevitable. She had attached a small, lightweight GPS band to his uninjured leg, a habit born of her profession, and on a crisp, clear morning, she carried him outside. She set him down on the wooden railing of her porch. Boreas looked at her, tilted his head, and then looked up at the vast, blue expanse of the Siberian sky. With a powerful thrust of his wings, he launched himself into the air. Evelyn watched him catch a thermal, spiraling higher and higher until he was nothing but a speck against the clouds. She wept then. It was the first time she had cried since Thomas died. 3 years passed. Evelyn grew frailer. The harsh environment was taking its toll on her bones and lungs. In the late autumn of 2024, the radio warned of a freak meteorological event, a polar vortex descending abnormally early, carrying winds of hurricane force. Daniel Pendleton radioed in a panic. "Evie, I can't make the drop. The storm front is too wide. You need to hunker down. I'll get to you as soon as the sky clears. Maybe a week." "I have enough firewood, Daniel. Don't risk it," she replied, though she knew her woodpile was dangerously low. The storm hit with biblical fury. For 4 days, the world was entirely white. The wind roared like a freight train, tearing shingles from the roof and piling snowdrifts halfway up the cabin's windows. On the 5th night, the disaster struck. The structural integrity of the old cabin, compromised by years of rot and now bearing the weight of several tons of wet, packed snow, finally gave way. With a deafening crack, the main support beam over the living area splintered. The roof caved in. Evelyn was violently thrown to the floor, pinned beneath a heavy section of the collapsed ceiling and a wall of frozen debris. The pain in her chest was blinding, ribs broken, her left arm pinned uselessly to her side. The wind immediately howled through the open ceiling, bringing the sub-zero temperatures directly down upon her. She was trapped beneath the wreckage of her own sanctuary, entirely invisible to the outside world. The snow began to bury the ruins of the cabin within hours. A week later, the skies finally cleared, leaving a blindingly bright, silent landscape. At the regional airstrip, Daniel Pendleton teamed up with Captain Robert Hayes, an emergency search and rescue pilot. They loaded up a Bell 407 helicopter and flew toward Evelyn's coordinates. But as they reached the valley where her cabin was supposed to be, Robert swore over the headset. "Daniel, there's nothing here. Just an endless white plain. The drifts are 40 feet high in some places. Without a visual on the structure, we're looking for a needle in 1,000 haystacks." Daniel stared out the window, his heart sinking. Evelyn's cabin was buried entirely under a massive snow dune. The GPS coordinates were approximate, mapping a broad acre of land, and the landscape was completely altered by the storm. "Circle the area," Daniel pleaded. "She might have dug out. She might have a flare." They circled for an hour. Fuel was running low. Robert was just about to make the agonizing call to turn back when a sudden movement caught his eye. "Look there, 3 o'clock, Robert yelled. A massive, dark shape was contrasting sharply against the blinding white snow. It was a golden eagle. The bird was behaving erratically. It wasn't hunting. It wasn't soaring. It was repeatedly diving at a specific, unremarkable mound of snow, screeching violently and tearing at the packed ice with its talons. It would fly up a few feet, then slam back down onto the snow, digging furiously. Its dark feathers a stark beacon against the white. "What the hell is it doing?" Robert muttered, bringing the helicopter to a hover. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes widening as he remembered the stories Evelyn had told him over the radio years ago. "Set us down, Robert. Set us down right next to that bird." The roar of the helicopter's rotors usually terrifies wildlife, but as they landed, the eagle refused to retreat. It stood its ground atop the snow mound, screeching defiantly at the mechanical beast until Daniel and Robert leaped out with folding shovels. Only then did the eagle take to the air, circling tightly above them. Daniel began to dig frantically where the bird had been tearing at the snow. 5 feet down, his shovel struck wood. "Here! It's the roof!" Daniel screamed over the wind. They worked with desperate adrenaline, hacking through the collapsed timber and snow. Finally, they broke through into a small, dark pocket of space beneath the main beam. There, shivering violently, barely conscious, and suffering from severe hypothermia, was Evelyn. She had survived for 6 days on melted snow and sheer willpower, but she was only hours away from freezing to death. As Robert carefully hoisted her out of the freezing grave and into the warm cabin of the helicopter, Evelyn's eyes fluttered open. She looked up at the sky. Circling above the helicopter, catching the sunlight on its massive wings, was the golden eagle. As Evelyn was loaded in, she squinted, her failing vision catching a momentary glint of metal on the bird's left leg, the unmistakable flash of an aluminum tracking band. Boreas. Ornithologists will tell you that birds of prey do not possess the emotional capacity for gratitude. They are driven by instinct, territory, and survival. Dr. Gregory Finch, Evelyn's former colleague, later hypothesized that Boreas had simply returned to his old feeding ground, the cabin roof, and, finding it altered and buried, was agitatedly trying to uncover his remembered territory. But as Evelyn lay recovering in a hospital in Novosibirsk, holding the hand of her daughter Abigail, who had flown out on the first available flight from London after hearing the news, she knew better, whether it was instinct, territorial memory, or a bond forged in blood and shared survival. The creature she had saved from the ice had returned to save her from the snow. Evelyn never returned to live in the taiga. She moved back to England, spending her remaining years with her daughter and her grandchildren. But every winter, when the north wind rattled the windows of her comfortable brick home, she would look up at the sky, smiling at the thought of a crippled eagle ruling the Siberian thermals, a silent guardian of the frozen world she left behind.